All right, hi. Hello. Okay, just give me a moment here because I'm going to share this out to a couple places. Let me see. Say hello if you're with me. Just say hi. All right, I'm just sharing this in a couple places. I want to make sure it's all working. Let me know if you can hear and see me. Okay. Hi, Sherry. How you doing? How is everybody doing and feeling today? I'm just going to get started in just a moment here. Just want to make sure that everyone can see this. Okay. Cool. All right. All right. I mean, I figured most people are probably going to watch this on the replay because it's during a weekday, in the middle of a weekday, so that's all good. All right. All right, hi you guys. Okay, so I wanted to jump on, this just kind of dropped in, this topic, and I'm glad it did because I think it's something that's really, really important to share, and it's something that I honestly don't feel like I've seen really much content on this topic, really. So I wanted to make that so that people could access it and for it to just be an open discussion that people could, be a part of. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So for those of you that don't know me, if this is your first time connecting with me, good morning, Karen. My name is Daisy Farrell. I'm a psychic medium, healer, and artist based in the Hudson Valley, New York. Thank you for joining me. And today we're going to talk about something that I think is really, really important to discuss, and that is really all around the concept of people being afraid to see a psychic or a medium, vice versa. So I have a few notes on this, but one of the reasons that it came up was that it's something, well, first off, it's something for me that has come up so many times in this work. I've seen it in many different ways. It's come up in many different ways, and it just came up a lot last week. So it just made me think about how, I really think I should talk about this. And I'd also love to know your perspective for those of you that are watching this live with me, or, if you're watching the replay, I'd love to know your perspective on it, or if you've ever had some experience like this, which in some of the stuff that I'm going to go over. It's really going to be not a very long discussion because there's not too much to go into, but I really wanted to kind of break down, I think, the key points to me that are important to go over when it comes to looking at this topic. Okay. So, this is what I would say. So here's the thing. I cannot tell you how many times I have encountered, let's say, people reaching out to me for a reading, or we even talk on the phone, or we're about to set up a session and then never happens, right? They don't follow through. And of course, there can be other factors to those situations, but there have definitely been scenarios where I think people get cold feet, right? Or they get nervous, or they get scared. So then they don't go through with it, right? But they want to. There's part of them that wants to, and wants to kind of see what is kind of over the edge of trying this, right? But then they get too afraid. Other situations I've had where, hey Cindy, how are you? Yeah, I'd love to know your opinion on this too, Cindy. I've had other situations too where I've heard people say, oh, I have a friend or such and such, right, that had this really difficult loss in their life, and I would love for them to go to a medium, but they tell me that they're so afraid to go, right? I've heard examples where, they say that they're afraid of what they're going to hear, right? They're afraid of what they're going to hear from their loved ones in spirit because of certain situations. And I'm gonna break down these different reasons, right, in a minute. Or then I get situations where people say, oh, I think it's interesting, but I don't want to know what's going to happen in my life, or I don't need to know, it scares me. Things like that, right? I've had both good and bad, yeah. Yes, me too. I mean, I have the same feeling about it, right? And I will also go into my own personal experiences as well, because I've also, unfortunately, I've had good and bad as well. And so, yeah. So again, yeah, totally. That you're afraid of the old cry. So you mean the medium, right? So I'm more talking about people afraid to go see a medium that aren't maybe a medium themselves. Okay. All right, you guys. So I'm going to just kind of break down certain reasons why this comes up and just kind of go into that. So I think one of the number one reason, oh no, the sitter, okay, yeah. Yeah, that's totally true. Well, and actually you bring up a good point, Cindy. Because here, I'm going to just say the other thing. I'm just writing this down. No, I like that point that you bring up, because that actually is a good point. So there's a few things here, and I think they all kind of overlap, right? But there's different nuances within that. So number one, right, one of the number one reasons I think people are fearful to go to a medium. Let's say they have unfinished business with someone that passed away. That can obviously be a very big spectrum of things. Abuse, or maybe it may not be that it's the person in spirit that maybe owes an apology or whatever the sitter may think. Maybe there's also certain things that happened that the sitter feels guilty about around the passing of the person, around something within the relationship. Just in general, I will say, unfinished business, that stings still, right? That's painful. That's hard to look at. And I totally can understand that, and it's a very valid thing to feel and understand. Unfortunately, I think what I see come up is that people are afraid. They're afraid of what would happen if they do get to talk to these people again. And there is that unfinished business there, right? And again, this is also all going to lead to my main point around all of this is do your research. Do your research around what psychic medium you go to. Because that's ultimately the key thing here. So to me, again, so unfinished business with somebody. And so I think because we're uneducated, not everybody, but I think people that tend to have these fears, right? They have assumptions around how that might play out. And they have assumptions in their mind around how if this person were to come through, that maybe they'd be angry at them, right? Or they'd say something that's hurtful. Or they would really bring up, well, you did this, this, and this to me. How could you? Stuff like that, right? They're afraid that that's going to get thrown in their face, essentially. And, oh no, what if, my loved one's in spirit and they're still mad at me, right? Or they still feel this certain way about some kind of conflict we had. Again, which is, I understand, and it is totally a very valid and human thing to think or feel. I also think it is just part of grief in general, right? Because we're going to have unfinished things in loss. It's very, very normal, right? But my biggest thing that I would say around that is two things. I know I just touched on it. again, if you're going to the right medium, the right psychic medium for you, and somebody that's really properly trained, you shouldn't have that problem, right? I also think that a session with a medium should never leave you feeling worse overall. I do think that there can be situations where, and actually I can just say that personally for myself, you know, there have been situations where I was earlier in grief and I had a session with a medium and it kind of made me feel worse afterwards. Not because the session was bad or it was anything to do with the medium, but more because it brought up this feeling of grief, right? And that I have this fleeting moment of connection with my loved one, but then it's over. And it's also, I think, further validates the reality that they are no longer with us, if that makes sense. So to me, that's probably one of the only scenarios in which I feel a reading may make you feel not so great afterwards, right? And please let me know in the comments, though, if you can think of other ideas around that. Other than that, it shouldn't make you feel like you have to question yourself, question your decisions, question your relationships, or the connection that you have with your loved ones. It shouldn't make you feel rocky. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. It shouldn't make you feel uneasy, right? Or like really upset. And I've had sessions like that where I've left being like, what on earth was that, right? And I'm really, really thankful that I at least have a decent enough, you know, head on my shoulders, right? In those situations where I kind of knew better to not give all this power to what kind of transpired in that session. But it makes me really upset because unfortunately, there's a lot of people that go to mediums and psychics that maybe don't feel that way, right? And they really, really hold on to every little word that the person is saying to them, which is so dangerous, right? And can be really, really harmful. So, okay, and the other point that I wanted to bring across around the fear around the unfinished business and what if I want to speak to someone, what if I don't want to speak to someone that's going to come through, all that kind of stuff, right? Number one, first thing I want to say is I've done a lot of readings, right? I've done a lot of readings, and I've done a lot of readings with these types of relationships where there was unfinished business, where there was maybe a really difficult relationship when the person was living, right? Even estranged relationships, okay? So many situations where, the sitter was shocked that the person even came through, things like that. But I can tell you, across the board, there has never been a situation where the communicator has come through and expressed immense anger, wanting to shame the sitter, wanting to point out all the things they did wrong. That's never happened. It's never, ever happened, right? And here's the thing that I want to make clear as well. I'm not saying that people that pass over, right? I think there's so many different variations and it really depends on the person. Let's say somebody has a difficult life. When they pass over, overall, I tend to find that, maybe they don't immediately turn into, Mother Teresa, right? We want to be realistic here. But they do gain a wider perspective on their life, how they handled things, on just everything that kind of happened in their life, right? And they do have some form of reflection and self-reflection. And I would say it depends on the person, because from what I've experienced, right, I think that there is a spectrum as far as how deeply people go into that reflection and also the amount of time it takes for them, right? I think there's a variation there. But overall, what I can say is regardless of where they're at in that process or their viewpoints on it, and even if they're still maybe working through some things, I've never experienced a feeling of someone's loved one needing to have, vengeance or needing to really prove their point or get across that they're very right in this situation and that the sitter needs to feel bad about it. Hi, Nina. Sorry. That's a great question, and yes, I will touch on that for sure, okay? I will absolutely touch on that, okay? All right. So I'm just going to kind of keep going into this, but then I will absolutely answer that for you. That's a really good question. So that's what I would say. I would say that really overall, the spirit world is all about love for the most part, right? And having that connection is really about healing, in my experience. And quite often, oh, thanks, Cindy. Yeah, they always come through with love, exactly. And I will also say that for me, every reading is unique. Every reading has a certain purpose. But it tends to be those readings where you get the unexpected communicator, or you get the person that had maybe the abusive relationship or the difficult relationship, and they apologize, or some type of healing takes place. Those tend to be the most powerful to me, and also the connections that are most needed for people to heal. And it's an amazing feeling for just me as the medium to even be a part of that, because they're so powerful and can be really, honestly, life-changing. So I think that's why it's also, it saddens me when people get that fear or they get that assumption in their mind, right? And then they never even open themselves to that possibility, right? Often too, right? Thinking that just because since somebody's dead, right? There's no shot for me to really heal fully in a way, right? Yeah, very healing. Yes. Because I would say, because I'm just thinking of some examples even that I've seen with people that aren't maybe into this stuff, right? And they have a loved one in spirit. You can do a ton of self-work on yourselves, and I think people can get to a place of peace within themselves if they've maybe had a difficult relationship with someone that has passed on, right? That was unresolved. However, I think it's pretty amazing and even more healing when you're able to have that direct connection to them in spirit. And you know what? That also doesn't have to be through medium. I just want to point that out, right? But it's so much more. It just rounds out that experience of healing to just a greater depth, right? When you're able to actually connect to them. So that's what I wanted to just say around that. And please feel free to add anything if that, sparked any ideas or any thoughts that you had. But really, yeah, I would say overall, in my experience, again, I've never ever had someone come through with anger, right? It's really only just love and excitement that they're getting to have this reunion with the sitter, right? Because I want you to think about this too. If you were in spirit, and let's say you maybe had a challenging relationship with someone, but it's somebody that you love very, very much, right? And let's say it maybe even wasn't a challenging relationship. Maybe there's something that your loved one feels guilty about or still holds on to, but you get this first opportunity to come through a medium and speak to them. Do you really think that the first thing that you would want to say to them is, I can't believe, you did such and such, right? Probably not, right? You'd probably be like, oh my God, I'm so happy to talk to you. Thank you for all the amazing things you did for me. Remember all of this and that we did together. All the things like that, right? It's good to think in that perspective, right? You have a limited window of time to get through what's most important. And I think when we can come from a still place, from a connected place, I think we know that at the end of the day, anger, hate, things like that, they don't really matter, right? They're not, it's just not a core piece of what matters. So I think it's good to keep that in mind. And it's also having some faith in your loved ones too, right? giving them some credit and faith in knowing that they wouldn't want to hurt you, right? And maybe they can change and they can evolve and they have the ability to bring through something that's healing for you and allowing them to do something for you. So I like how I said this is going to be a short discussion. I don't know why I said that. Okay, but I think that's pretty much my point around that. But again, like I said, if anything comes up, let me know and feel free to add. Another thing that I was going to touch on that I think I see come up a lot is when people say they're afraid to know things, and that's why they avoid psychics and mediums. That's another real common one that I hear. So what I want to say about that is a few things. I would say that in particular, I mean, I think a lot of these things in particular also come from, again, just a lack of knowledge of what it actually is possible for somebody that's properly trained as a psychic medium. And that's something that that's why I'm making this live, because that's something that I'm really, really passionate about, getting the word out around that. Like, there is a proper way to do this, right? And there is a wrong way. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that do the wrong way. And it's really, really harmful. But number one, first off, that I'd like to say is please keep in mind that psychics and mediums are people. They're not God. You know, they're not some mighty being that knows all, right? And is greater in knowledge from you at all. They're not, right? They're people. They're people that just have a certain sensitivity, okay? And also realize that in a session, however long that may be, right? 20 minutes to an hour, so, or, you know, around that frame, right? Keep in mind as well, think about how in a session, we are literally trying to take in an entire lifetime of a person. And then let's say the entire lifetime of multiple people in spirit in an hour or less. Impossible, right? It's impossible. There's no way to do that. It would take months, probably, right? To tell your whole story, to get into every little detail of who you are. So please also keep that in mind, that the scope that they are looking at is limited, right? It's going to be limited within that time frame. If they're well trained, it will be that right particular limited space that they need to hear. Hi there. Does that make sense? Let me know, right? Like, if you really are well trained and you know what you're doing, you should be able to understand that, right, you only have a limited amount of time. So you're really going to focus on getting the key pieces that the sitter really needs and they really need to hear, right? So please realize that too. So if you're going to somebody that's maybe not doing this, you know, that great, and they're giving these sweeping statements about you that doesn't really sit right, or maybe they're giving these generalizations or these very concrete statements about who you are as a person, things like that, I wouldn't feel too great about that necessarily, right? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Because the other thing that I want to bring up here too, okay, I'm going to go on a little bit about this, right? Here's the other thing. I think mainly when people are talking about this, they're like, I'm afraid of what they're going to see in my future, okay? Which, all right, I get that. However, again, if somebody is not properly trained, and don't get me started with this, but I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me and they say, oh, you know, I went to a psychic years ago and they told me that I was going to get in a car accident, and I've never been able to let that go. And I'm always afraid, wondering, when is that going to happen? That kills me to hear that, right? I mean, why would you say that to someone? You know, and I know that there's an argument around like, oh, if we get this indication of something really, really bad that's going to happen, it's our job to warn people and such and such. Yeah, I'm not totally cool with that, right? I think there's a fine line within that space. And I think it's irresponsible. I think it's irresponsible to leave someone that comes to you in a position where they feel fearful and they feel that they have no way out of a certain outcome. No way. Please, if anyone has ever told you that this is going to happen and that's final, please do not go to them again. You shouldn't be there in the first place, right? No. Really, really important to realize, and I know I already said this again, psychic mediums they're not God, okay? They may get impressions on certain things, and this is the way I look at predictions, okay? And this is, I'm somebody that has had multiple premonition dreams, certain premonitions. I've certainly had predictions within readings that have come true, things like that. And okay, yes, that is possible to have happen. But the way that I look at predictions is this. You always keep in mind that predictions are just potentials. They're just potentials. And to me, it's in that moment in time, the psychic or medium is picking up on certain variables that are taking place within your life just in that moment in time. Literally just then. So keep in mind, these factors and variables can change within an hour, right? They can change all the time. But they are getting a snapshot of where you're at right in that moment when they are giving you a reading. That's it. So again, touching on that concept of limited view, okay? So right in that snapshot of that moment of time, sure, certain potentials may feel really aligned for where you are, okay? Again, that can change. It can always change. And nothing is ever set in stone in that way. The other thing too is that you are in control of how things unfold quite often. Because I also find this, it's right, like, I think that psychics and mediums can tap into your potential and what is possible for you if certain things match up. If you are willing to step into that calling, let's say, right? Or you decide to follow that path or that potential, then sure, maybe that could come true. But you also have the choice to say no. You have the choice to change your mind. You have the choice to do other things, right? I think that there is an infinite amount of potential and possibilities within everyone's life, right? That I think is always changing. Exactly, Sherry. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. I cannot tell you, and here's the other thing. I think sometimes people can be wrong, right? That's the other thing. And that's something that I also feel, unfortunately, the media messes with. I think the media does I think it's a kind of a good and a bad thing, right? I think it's good that psychic mediumship is becoming more popularized and is more out in the media now, right? But at the same time, those shows bother me because I feel like they give a very false idea of how this stuff works and what people should expect as well. Because I guarantee you too, there are so many times when some of these famous people, right, on TV, they get things wrong, right? It's normal. Like, we're human. And it's always edited out, right? And that drives me crazy. That drives me crazy because I think the thing that I don't like about that especially is the fact that it creates this idea that being wrong is bad. And that being wrong is just something that should never happen in a psychic medium reading, right? And if it does, you should get your money back or whatever, right? Or like they're not good enough. It's not true. And also that like why, to me, I think that's so unfair, because I think we should, we celebrate the idea that being wrong is okay, and being wrong is how we learn, right? And being wrong actually opens windows and opportunities that being right does not. So why is it, I just hate that. Like, I don't like that. Why do we have to apply this really strict idea onto American mediums, right? Or media, mediums that are in the public eye. It drives me crazy. Because the other thing is that when I get something wrong, right? Again, if you're properly trained, you know to go back and get more information. Give the information in a different way. Figure that out. Navigate it. And typically it works out, right? So there's nothing wrong with being wrong. So also keep in mind that, a person may get an impression about something with you, and they could be wrong. So you really, really need to realize that when you go to a psychic medium, no matter what they say, take what feels right to you, ultimately, right? You don't have to 100%, give all this power and trust into every single one of their words, right? It's not good to do. I don't think that's good to do really in anything, right? So why would you even do it with them, Because I've definitely had situations where I feel that I've gone to psychics or mediums, and I feel like they pick up on things from my past, which is a lot. There's a lot going on there, right? And then they misinterpret that, or they misinterpret it as something going on right now, or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. Always learning. We should be always learning, right? So there can be misinterpretation there, right? It's not a perfect science. It's not. And if somebody is telling you that they are guaranteeing without a doubt that, like, this is going to happen to you, or this has to happen, and you have no other way out of that, run. Please get out of there, because that's crazy. It's not true, okay? Let me just look at my notes here again of what else I was feeling about here. Right, and that comes to, again, like, you should never leave feeling worse or fearful or like, oh my God, something bad's gonna happen to me, right? And that's the other thing. It's not, again, because I'm also not saying that a good medium is going to sugarcoat everything, right? No, I don't think they should. I think it's important to be honest. I do think it's important to go into the areas that are maybe a little hard to look at, right? Because that's how you heal. That's where you get benefit. That's where you find growth, okay? But there's the right way to do it. There's a right way to do it. Another thing that drives me crazy is you'll see mediums or psychics, right, deliver information, and it comes off really, really harsh, right? Rude, maybe graphic. There's a lot of examples I can give, right? And they'll say, well, I just give what I get. That drives me crazy, right? Because yes, I think it's important that we value the information that we're receiving and to honor what we're receiving. But our job as a medium is to take that information and then deliver it to our sitter in a way that isn't harmful and in a way that's respectful, right? So that's another thing. So the other thing that I would say around this too is, right, I think a good medium or a good psychic is going to give you multiple options as far as what to do maybe in a scenario that you're struggling with in your life at this time, right? They should never pigeonhole you into, you have to do this, you have to do, right? They should say, you could try this, you could try that. I'm sensing that if you try this, that could happen. I'm sensing that if you try this, maybe that could happen. And again, there's also always variables in between this and within this, right? So, and that's the thing that you'll see sometimes too, unfortunately, is that I feel that sometimes people will come to me, right? And they're really looking for what's going to happen, you know, within my job within 1 month. What's like, they're looking for very specific answers to things. And it's like, you know, again, I can do my best to feel into what I'm sensing around those situations, but it doesn't work like that. And it's not, because that's the thing. I really would never look at going to a medium or psychic to solve your problems, right? To make your decisions for you, to make, you know, really life-altering decisions for you. I would never, ever do that. Even if they're amazing, right? I think they can be supportive. I think that they can help you maybe sort some things out and how you're feeling. But you got to go with you. How do you release after one of those very... Yeah, good question. I'll touch on that too. Thank you. Okay. Right? You know, we should never rely on... Right, it's data. It's data. It's guidance. It's data. I can even give this example even within AA, right? In AA, which I'm in, right? So there's a rule within AA, or not a rule, but a suggestion that's often talked about, where, you know, let's say you have a really difficult thing going on and you have to make a decision. They say, okay, call at least 3 other alcoholics within the program to get their perspective on the situation, right? And then sit with yourself, sit with your higher power, and go from there. So again, it's never saying, take someone's advice and just run with it because they obviously know way more than you. No, no one knows more than you about what you need. No one. Literally no one. Okay, Shirley, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you again. So let me know how that feels, you guys. Just what I was kind of touching on there. Okay, and I just want to make sure. Okay. So here's the other thing. Okay, sounds good. So what this all ends up kind of coming down to is do your research. Do your research, please. Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah, and I'll answer your question, Nina, and I can try to like tag you when I answer it too. So do your research as far as who you're going to go to, okay? Because I think that's often where we end up in these harmful situations, or we end up in these scenarios that don't go so well, right? And I know, unfortunately, it can be a little tricky to navigate. I think there are so many different psychics, so many options out there, right? And that's the thing too, like you could get recommendations from other people, and it may be a great match for them, but maybe it's not so great for you. That's something to keep in mind if, you know, you're kind of going off of recommendations from friends. I'm not saying that's always the case, but you do want to kind of feel into how you feel about it, ultimately, right? Do you get a good feeling when you maybe look at this person's website? Look at their credentials. Look at their bio. Even better, if it's possible, and I in particular, I'm really picky. I'm really, really picky now, right? With who I go to. And for the most, and who I ever like recommend to have people go to, you know. And really, one of my key ways of kind of discerning who I would send to who, right, is I try to see if I'm able to watch the medium work in action, seeing them give readings, right? Because that's probably one of your quickest indicators and ways to know what they're all about, right? Because if they're well trained and if they're really, they have integrity, right? They're going to present very consistently in the way that they do things. Yeah, you know, and even seeing them do a DEM, seeing them do platform, that's a great opportunity to be able to see how a medium works, see their particular vibe, their personality, and if you feel drawn to it, if you feel like it's good, right? Sometimes people will share videos of them giving readings, Sometimes they offer opportunities. Like I do that, right? Like I have dems that I try to do monthly, which I think is a really great way for people to just get a sample of how you operate as a medium. So I would always be a bit skeptical if there's no way to see that from someone. It's not that maybe they could be great, right? They could be great, but it does make it a little more challenging to me personally to know that for sure, right? So that's one thing I would say. You can totally look at testimonials. Sometimes I can be a little wary about that because, who knows? Certain ones, though, I think like Google, those can be good, right? Because they're not something that can necessarily be well, I guess they can be. So, again, be a little mindful of that. Another thing, when you're looking at somebody's bio or credentials or their training, I think it's important to see, for example, I think a lot of people will say, I went to Arthur Findlay. Great. Arthur Findlay's great. I'm not saying anything bad about Arthur Findlay. However, well, and not even Arthur Findlay, I would even say, let's say they say, I've trained at Arthur Findlay. I trained with such and such. I trained with this famous medium, whatever. That's all fine and good. However, be aware of the particular programs that they may be just like saying, because a lot of those classes and programs, anyone can sign up for them. Anyone. Doesn't matter who you are. You could even maybe not even really have that strong of a mediumistic connection or whatever, or could have all kinds of issues. Who knows, right? You can still go. There's a lot of classes like that where there's no application process or screening process. So keep that in mind, because someone can list all these really impressive credentials, right? But it could mean nothing. Because also to keep this in mind, somebody could go to 1 million classes, but they may not be the right classes for them. Maybe they need more training on ethics or handling traumatic situations. Maybe they need to work on themselves. That's a big one within mediumship, because a lot of the times I find that people come into this work and maybe they didn't heal some really serious stuff within themselves. That's going to impact how they work with people, right? And it's unfortunately not something that's often addressed with a lot of classes within this work, okay? So just things to keep in mind. But what I would say is, going to somebody that is trusted, somebody that you feel really does talk the talk, or walk the talk, right? Say it and do it. Because I don't want to just hear it, right? I want to see the actions matching that. Inside matching the outside, okay? There shouldn't be any weirdness around that. It should be pretty authentic, pretty straightforward. This is what you get. This is how I work. Done. No weird kind of gray areas with that. So that's just some tips I would take. And, and sure, you can absolutely go off of recommendations. I do think within this work, that's kind of our main way of getting business, is word of mouth. But again, I still would always, let's say a friend recommends someone to you, I would still always do additional research or just look into the person a little more before you just book something, okay? Okay. All right, so I feel like that's kind of good with that, unless anybody wants to bring anything else up to me. So now I will touch on these 2 questions because they were both really good. Okay. All right, so Nina, and then I'm gonna tag Nina right now. Okay. Okay, so I am answering your question now. So I'm just going to scroll back to see here. So Nina asked, because I think this is a really good question to go over. I don't know any of my deceased family. To think of using a medium psychic in this capacity. Would it even be beneficial to connect with a medium? I think that's a great question. So I would say yes. I would say yes. You know, it can be a little challenging, for sure. I mean, this happens. It does happen. There tends to be people in spirit that we have that we don't know a lot about, right? Or maybe we don't have ways to validate the information that we're being given, right? So there's definitely can be some challenge within that, for sure. Because I would just say for someone like me, right, the way that I'm trained, the way that I work is as an evidential medium. So I'm somebody that's really going to give a statement, I'm going to want validation on that statement, and then I move on to the next piece of information, right? So if somebody comes to me and they can't validate anything, literally nothing, that's going to be challenging, right? That's going to be challenging. It doesn't mean, though, that they're not there. It does not mean that I couldn't pick up on them and get information from them, right? I can still do my best to receive what I get, right? And it also depends, Nina, because I'd be curious as to, you know, if you know maybe, let's say, just even 5 pieces of information from one of these people, right? Because even if you don't know a lot, if you're able to validate maybe even, well, even for example, right, I would say if you're at least able to maybe identify the relationship to you of the person that's in spirit, who they are to you, that can be enough for me to maybe move in and see what else I get, right? I think it's fascinating to be open to that. I do. I think it can be really, really interesting to learn about certain family members that you never got an opportunity to know, right? And to see how, so here's another thing. You can also get validation that they are with you and that they're a part of your process in your life, because I could connect to them, right? And then maybe they will give information on what they're seeing going on in your current life, right? There's other things that they can kind of do to help validate their presence, if that makes sense. And the other thing is that if there's certain pieces of information that maybe you don't understand, it's really good to have recorded, right? And then maybe down the line, you're able to do some research on your own. And how amazing would that be if you could get some of that validated, right? So let me know if that helps, if that's helpful. I think it can be really interesting. And one thing I will also say is that I definitely have some people in spirit that I never knew, right? They passed long before I was ever born, but they are very, very present within my spirit team and within my life as guides and just within everything that I do, right? So I think it's actually can be a beautiful thing and a beautiful opportunity to get to know some of these people because they are a part of you, regardless of whether or not they were present in your actual life, right? So I think it can be a fascinating thing to explore, right? But maybe don't go into it with, you know, some kind of massive expectation if there's not a lot that you can necessarily validate. So I hope that makes sense, you know, and again, and I would say too, right, there's a very big spectrum kind of within those situations, right? So that's basically what I would say around that. The other thing too is that often when I have people like that too, you know, I mean, also could pick up on their guides. I can pick up on a lot of different things, but I think it can be very, very interesting. Well, here actually one other thing, one other thing that I would say around that too, that could be really, really interesting. Let's say you don't have a way to validate certain pieces of information. If you go to one medium and they give you such and such about a couple of communicators, people in spirit, and then you wait a while, right? Then maybe go to another really well, a credible, you know, a good, solid medium. Try to do the same thing. Let's say they give you the same type of information. That's another way to get some validation. Yeah, I agree, Cindy. I agree. I think it can be interesting to just see what happens, right? But again, I would be, especially with that situation, I would be very mindful of who you go to, right? Because you don't want to go to somebody that's going to just guarantee, oh, I'm getting all of this and this is correct and I know it's correct and blah, 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 right? If they can't get it validated, right? So again, I would just be mindful of who you go to if you do want to consider doing that. Okay. And then if you have any follow-up question to that or what I said, feel free to ask me. Okay, and then the last thing that I will just wrap this up with, Pamela, how do you release after one of those very scary readings? Great question. So it's happened to me. It's happened to me before. So let's say you go to a reading and they really upset you, right? It can take some time to recover from that, right? I think sometimes it can make us feel really vulnerable. It can make us feel very afraid. It can make us spiral. I think it can create this chain reaction within our minds. Because often if something is scary or it upsets you in a reading, it's most likely that it is touching on something that's really raw within you, right? Or something that's a kind of a tender point within you, okay? So I would think about that. And that's kind of how I was able to work through certain things that I will just, and I'll give an example. So I went to this one medium who was very, very kind of renowned, or well-known. And he was really, really touching on a relationship of mine. And the thing was that relationship had a very, very kind of traumatic past. There was lots of challenging things that I had gone through within that relationship. But at the point that I finally was having this reading, we were really past that. And if anything, it made our relationship better than ever, right? And because that doesn't always happen, but in this case, it did. And I felt very, very confident about that relationship. But what I will say is that I spent a long time in my life, in that relationship, feeling like I needed to validate it to people and prove to people, this is worth it. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing this. I want you to see what I see. And it would be very draining for me, and it was really, really hard for me, right? So when this medium was working with me, he was picking up on all of the difficult things that had happened. And I personally feel that they were misinterpreting what was going on because they were kind of seeing it as a current issue, right? And they kept going to that as if this is a problem or something bad is gonna keep happening here, or this isn't ideal. This isn't the right relationship for you, right? And I left that reading and cried and cried. I was so upset. But I think I did two things. One thing is that, again, and this is what I would do, I was able to express how I was feeling, thankfully, to that person that was part of this situation, which helped me kind of process why I was feeling so upset. So again, I would go to a safe person, go to a open person that you feel that you can kind of process what's being brought up, right? And I was able to quickly understand that the only reason I was upset was because it was poking that area of me that was still kind of raw and was still vulnerable. around feeling the need to prove or validate the authenticity of my relationship, or that it was good enough, right? It was poking at that. And it made me upset because it brought up those feelings, and this feeling that gets triggered for me, right? I don't really feel that way anymore, but at the time it was still something that was pretty vulnerable for me. And then I was able to see that, feel it, acknowledge it, and be like, okay, that's all that was. And come back to my center. Where am I at? How do I feel? How do I feel about the relationship right now? I'm good. I'm okay. I know where I trust myself. That's number one here, right? I think all of this ultimately will always come back to your own trust. Your trust of self, knowing yourself, right? Trusting your higher power or whatever, right? And being able to always have that be your home base, not what other people say. And this is true for really anything, right? Not just going to a medium. But it's having the ability to see that from a bigger perspective. This is just something that someone said. That's it. It doesn't have to mean anything. It doesn't. I get to decide what that means for me. And the other thing I would say too is you don't need to make it become this drawn out process either of getting really pulled into the feelings of what this is bringing up. Because like I was saying, it's probably bringing up stuff from the past. And I'm all for it. Like, I think something that we can get stuck in, especially in spiritual work, is consistently reopening wounds or reopening shadow work or whatever, right? And I'm not like, we don't need to keep doing that. Of course, there's always going to be things within us that need to be healed, that maybe don't feel complete, that maybe don't feel quite right. But I think that's just being a human. That's just having a soul. And I think that's okay. I don't think it's healthy, really, right? I think there's a balance there. We don't have to keep opening up these painful experiences over and over again if all it's doing is bringing us pain, right? So that's just the other thing I would say too. Like, don't allow that to turn into this whole, experience of something traumatic or overwhelming. Obviously, in certain situations that might be hard to control, right? I understand. But doing our best to maybe slow that process down and be like, whoa, where am I at right now, right? What just got poked, triggered within me? Okay. I don't need to go there. I don't need to. So let me know if that makes sense. I'm just trying to think, because I feel like there was something else that kind of came up for me. Yeah, I mean, I would just say, take what feels good to you within a session. Take what feels good and leave the rest, right? Leave the rest. Oh, another example, because I've actually seen this happen. This has happened to me also. Also, if somebody is not, again, well-trained, it's very possible where there are times when they can pick up on your fears or things that you're afraid of happening, but it's not actually a potential and not actually something that's going to happen. And I remember, I'm just thinking back of like all the readings that have like upset me, right? And that was something that happened to me too. I was going through a certain thing in my life that was giving me a lot of anxiety, but it was anxiety about things that never happened, right? It was anxiety about what could happen here, what I'm feeling, and what it's bringing up. And it was bringing up things from my past, certain things like that. And in this particular reading, I felt the person completely zeroed in on that, but they made it as if it was an outcome, right? Or a potential. And it made me very upset. But I was able to realize that, right? That they were just picking up on my anxiety and they didn't even realize that. Okay? So I hope that helps. I hope that helps. Again, like I said, if anything doesn't sit quite right, trust that. Trust that feeling, right? I think it's really, really important to go into any of these types of experiences as best you can with a solid sense of self. A solid sense of self and a solid connection to your source of strength, whatever that may be, right? And your core being, okay? Of course, I understand that there may be situations where you're in a lot of grief or you're in not a great space, because that is sometimes a reason why we go to mediums and psychics, right? And so that can make us feel like we're on a bit more of shaky ground. But again, that's just bringing this point home even further. Also, why it is so incredibly important to go to the right person. Because the right person is properly trained in not doing any harm. And they're properly trained in handling somebody that's in a very vulnerable place, right? Because a lot of people that come to mediums are in a vulnerable space. So that's really where I'm just further confirming that suggestion that I'm bringing up. And that, oh right, and that was, I realized that there's one other point I'm going to make. So I like it. This conversation was going to be like 30 minutes, and that didn't happen. So thank you for sticking with me. The one last thing that I will say that I forgot to touch on was, I think also one of the reasons people get fearful around going to mediums and psychics is the fear of being vulnerable, which actually, Cindy, I think you brought that up. People being afraid that they're going to cry, or afraid that they're going to break down or show emotion. Because it's true. There are certain people that go through really, really horrible things in their life, right? And they just shut down, or they don't go there, or they're like, that didn't happen. I'm not going to even think about it, right? I'm just going to shove it down here. Or I have to, or there's other scenarios too, where it's saying like, I need to maintain this level of poised kind of strength for my family, or whatever it may be. People have so many different reasons as to why they don't want to be vulnerable and show vulnerability. And totally makes sense to me, right? That you wouldn't want to go to somebody because you're going to be vulnerable, right? You're going to be vulnerable, and I suggest that you try to be vulnerable when going to someone, because it's going to give you the best experience. If we go to somebody and we're so closed off, it can still transpire, it can still happen, but it's not necessarily going to be as beneficial as it could be, right? And that's the other thing. I'm a big advocate of vulnerability. Let it out. Be vulnerable, right? There's so much power within vulnerability, and it's something that I will emphasize forever. I really will. Because I think for me, just with my personal background, vulnerability is what saved my life, right? So for anybody that's thinking of that, maybe think a little bit about why vulnerability is hard for you. What is your reason for wanting to not be vulnerable? I think it's something that's important to think about, right? Because often those reasons come from things that happen to us. It comes from things that were told to us that probably aren't true. Yeah. And I think it's important to look into that and think about it. So if you're not willing to be vulnerable, you may want to wait and maybe sit with that and look at that first. Okay? And I think that was the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on around that. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I just think that this is really important to discuss. I think it's important to put out there, because I think it's something that isn't, like I said, I don't think it's really out there that much. I think a lot of people maybe have moments where they really want to go to a medium, they want to go to a psychic, they want to hear from their loved ones, but then X, Y, and Z pops up in their mind and it stops them. So I think that's why I wanted to, yeah, totally right. People have those types of reasons, and I get it. Yeah, so I think there's so much amazing, amazing healing and power and life-changing things that can take place from going to the right medium and the right psychic. So I wanted to put this out there to show that to people, you know, because it is possible to have a good experience, right? It's just doing your research and also feeling like you can kind of know yourself enough and be within yourself to trust your own discernment. So I really hope that this helps. And as I said, I feel like a lot of people will be watching the replay of this. So if anything comes up from this discussion, if you want to share your own personal experiences, maybe, you know, a difficult reading you had and maybe how you kind of worked through that, anything at all around this topic, I would love to hear from you. So just drop it in the comments. And I can always do a follow-up to this live too, if there's more that you need me to touch on or you have other questions. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me on your, well, kind of like lunch break, right? And what do I have coming up here? I have a lot of things coming up, but right now I do have a full moon ceremony that's taking place on Zoom. And that is going to be on, it's this Sunday at 6 p.m. EST. And I'm going to give you the sign up link right here. These are always so beautiful and really, really fun. There will be a replay available if you can't make it live, but I do recommend being there live. I love doing ceremonies and we're going to have a lot of fun. So join me if you can. If you can't, all good. And I will see you guys very, very soon. All right, bye.